Clark with 34 points, leading the Hawkeyes into the fourth.
For 2 straight years, Caitlin Clark did not just lead the WNBA All-Star vote, she redefined what that number could look like. First place, twice, by a margin no one else came close to touching. Then, on June 17, 2026, the first returns landed, and her name was not at the top, not second, not third, 5th place, trailing her own teammate. The result split the league's reaction within the hour, reopening a pattern tracing back to one retired king who had quietly shown up for Clark before. This video breaks down what changed, why the internet split so fast, and why so many are watching LeBron James's silence. The numbers don't lie. Start with what changed, because the change is the entire story. Since entering the league in 2024, Caitlin Clark has not finished outside the top spot in a single round of All-Star fan voting. Not once, not for 2 full seasons. In 2025, she opened the first returns with 515,993 votes, more than 30,000 ahead of Minnesota's Napheesa Collier in second place. By the time final tallies were counted,
courtside by Napheesa Collier following this win, and Napheesa, credit the Fever, they put on a show in the fourth quarter.
Clark had crossed 1.2 million votes, enough to make her a team captain alongside Collier for the All-Star game in Indianapolis. That is the baseline. That is the standard she set for herself, season after season, vote after vote. Now place this year's numbers next to that baseline, and the gap becomes impossible to ignore. The 2026 first returns, released on June 17th, show Las Vegas guard A'ja Wilson leading with 308,249 votes. Dallas rookie Paige Bueckers sits second with 298,027. Clark's own teammate, Aaliyah Boston, claimed third with 282,186. New York's Breanna Stewart rounded out fourth with 255,879.
Looking for Vandersloot. 8 to shoot. Not much doing here for New York. Stewart on cloud.
And then, fifth, Caitlin Clark, with 253,602 votes, nearly 55,000 votes behind the leader, behind a teammate she shares a locker room with. Is that a coincidence, or is something deeper happening to the fan base that once made her the most voted player the league had ever produced? Context matters here, and the context cuts in more than one direction. Total turnout across the league is down significantly this year. The top 40 vote-getters combined for 4,353,318 votes, compared with 6,410,965 votes at this same stage last season. That is a drop of over 2 million votes league-wide. Not just for Clark. Every major name lost ground compared to last year's pace. But Clark's decline was...
Caitlin Clark has it! More history for the Fever rookie!
By every measurable standard, the steepest of them all. A fall from first to fifth while her own teammate climbed past her. None of this happened in a vacuum. Indiana opened the 2026 season, splitting its results through the first stretch of games, even as Clark posted averages of 20.4 points, 4.6 rebounds, 8.3 assists, and 2.5 three-pointers a night, numbers that would headline most rosters in the league. Her shooting percentage dipped below her usual standard during this stretch, a detail analysts have pointed to when explaining the slide. But scoring averages and shooting slumps do not fully explain a drop of this size. 260,000 votes do not disappear because of a few missed jump shots. So what does explain it? There is also a business dimension to this number that rarely gets mentioned in the heat of a voting controversy. Fan voting totals are not just a popularity contest. They shape which players get featured in league marketing, which jerseys retailers stock heaviest, and which matchups broadcasters schedule into premium windows. For 2 years,
I think what people need to understand, we need great leadership in this time across all levels.
Clark's vote totals were the league's strongest evidence that a single player could move that machinery almost single-handedly. A drop to fifth does not erase what she has already built, but it does, for the first time, hand that same leverage to 4 other players simultaneously climbing towards stardom of their own. That shift alone is worth watching regardless of how the final tally lands. It is also worth remembering how unusual the last 2 years were in the first place. Before Clark entered the league, no player had ever approached the kind of fan vote totals she produced as a rookie. The league's previous record holders were putting up numbers in the tens of thousands, not the hundreds of thousands. Measured against that older history, even a fifth-place finish with 253,000 votes would have shattered most prior records outright. The real story may not be that Clark has fallen.
The all-time leading scorer in women's college basketball.
It may be that the league finally has 5 players capable of generating vote totals that, just 3 seasons ago, would have been almost unthinkable for anyone not named Clark. Is that a crisis for her brand? Or is it the clearest sign yet that the audience she helped build has grown wide enough to support more than one face at the top of it? The internet split in seconds. The first returns were barely an hour old before the disagreement started, and it did not stay contained to basketball commentary. Sports analyst Jason Whitlock used the moment to take direct aim at Clark's fanbase, posting that her supporters were busy blaming everyone but themselves for what he called an unprecedented fall in popularity. He went further, arguing that Clark had simply behaved like a typical WNBA player this season, and that her most devoted fans had turned her into a victim narrative rather than crediting her as a victor. It was a pointed accusation, and it landed at the exact moment her numbers gave it the most weight. On the other side of the divide, Clark's own fans treated the fifth-place finish as something between an embarrassment and a call to action. One fan wrote online that it felt humiliating that Clark was not even the leading vote-getter on her own team. Another vowed to cast a full Fever ballot every single day until voting closed. The Indiana Fever organization itself leaned into the moment rather than away from it, posting that having 3 players, Boston, Clark, and guard Kelsey Mitchell, inside the league's top 10 vote-getters was something to celebrate, regardless of the order.
Caitlin Clark here, Haley Van Lith right there, but you're never right there when it's Caitlin.
Mitchell, for context, sat 10th overall with 170,125 votes, giving Indiana more representation in the early top 10 than any other franchise. Analysts outside the Whitlock camp framed the story differently. WNBA and NBA commentator Alex Kennedy highlighted what he called the wildest detail in the entire release, that the league's most marketed player was not even the top vote-getter inside her own arena. That framing strips away the blame the fans angle and points instead at something structural: a crowded, loaded ballot, a shorter window of voting so far, and a year where 4 other stars are having seasons strong enough to draw votes away from anyone, Clark included. Is this a fan base falling asleep, or is it simply 5 elite players splitting attention?
1, 2, that's like watching, I don't know, some type of game
that used to belong almost entirely to one WNBA logo overlay, voting page screenshot mock-up out. It helps to look at who is actually ahead of her. Aja Wilson is leading the league outright in scoring and shot blocking this season. Paige Buchers, last year's Rookie of the Year, has built on that breakout with a sophomore campaign strong enough to draw national attention on its own. Aaliyah Boston is posting a career-high scoring average for Indiana. Brianna Stewart remains one of the most decorated forwards the sport has ever produced. None of the 4 players ahead of Clark are undeserving, which is precisely what makes this story harder to resolve than a simple decline narrative. It is not that one player got worse. It is that several got better at the same time. There is a quieter undercurrent in this debate too, one that rarely makes it into a single headline. A meaningful share of the reaction online is not really about vote totals at all. It is about who gets to be the face of a league that, for 2 years, was defined almost entirely by one rookie's arrival. Some of the pushback aimed at Clark's fan base carries an undertone of relief, as if critics are glad to see the spotlight spread out. Some of the defensiveness from her supporters carries an undertone of fear, as if a single bad voting cycle could undo years of progress. Neither reaction is really about 253,000 votes. Both are about something much larger, whether the WNBA's recent boom belongs to one player, or whether it was always bigger than any single name attached to it.
Clark with 34 points, leading the Hawkeyes into the 4th.
What nobody on either side disputed was the scale of the swing. A player who broke voting records in back-to-back seasons does not fall to 5th by accident, and a fan base that mobilized hundreds of thousands of votes twice before does not stay quiet without a reason. The debate over which reason is correct, fatigue, competition, or something else entirely, is exactly the kind of unresolved tension that, in the past, has pulled outside voices into the conversation. And one outside voice in particular has a track record of showing up at moments like this one. Why everyone is watching LeBron. To understand why people are watching for a reaction from LeBron James, the story rewinds to last summer. In June of 2025, a different vote produced a different snub. Clark led the fan vote outright and ranked 4th among media voters, yet the league's own players ranked her 9th among guards, behind names including Paige Bueckers and her own teammate Kelsey Mitchell. The placement did not cost Clark her spot.
They're going to go with double technicals,
since fan voting had already secured her a captaincy. But the symbolism of her peers ranking her 9th, after a season that had reshaped the league's attendance and television numbers, ignited a firestorm of its own. Broadcaster Dick Vitale led that charge, posting that the ranking reeked of pure jealousy and that Clark's peers would eventually recognize what she had done for the league. Chartered planes, rising salaries, sold-out arenas, better ratings. Sports Illustrated's Instagram reposted the message the next day. Buried in the list of accounts that liked that repost was one name that drew immediate attention: LeBron James. No statement, no quote, no press conference, just a single, quiet like. And it became its own story, because it fit a pattern people had already noticed. Months earlier, when an injury ended Clark's season early, James commented that it was a minor setback for a major comeback, telling her to rest, heal, and be herself. After an earlier return from injury, he posted that the CC effect was back. Then in March of 2026, the two crossed paths again, courtside, at a Pacers-Lakers game, where Clark, credentialed as a guest photographer, caught James mid-argument with referees and posted the shot herself. Individually, each moment is small. A like, a comment, a well-timed camera. Together, they read like a pattern. Quiet support, delivered consistently, almost always at the exact moment Clark needed it. There is weight behind who is doing the supporting too. James is the all-time leading scorer in NBA history, a global face of the sport for 2 decades.
Looking for James, he's got it.
When a name with that kind of reach enters a conversation, even silently, the conversation gets louder everywhere else. That also explains why he, specifically, keeps surfacing here. The two have never been teammates or shared a franchise. What connects them is closer to recognition between two athletes who each became the singular gravitational center of their sport. James has lived the exact pressure Clark now lives. Every stat, every vote, every injury treated as national news. Which may be why his support, however small, tends to land heavier than anyone else's. That history is exactly why this year's 5th place finish has people checking his page. If the playbook holds, a quiet gesture would not be surprising, but here is the part worth saying plainly. As of now, there has been no confirmed reaction from LeBron James to the 2026 voting results. The returns are barely a day old. History says the silence may not last, or this could be the year the pattern breaks. Silence has a history. It is worth asking why a single liked post or a short comment from one retired player carries this much weight in the first place. Part of the answer is structural. The WNBA All-Star roster is not decided by fan votes alone. Fan voting accounts for half the total.
28 all-time home matchups against Indiana. That is our best record against any team, and Caitlin Clark.
Current players account for a quarter, and a media panel accounts for the final quarter. Only the fan vote determines who becomes a team captain. That means a snub from players, like the one in 2025, can sting without changing the outcome, while a snub from fans, like the one currently unfolding, strikes at the only category that actually decides the most visible honor in the sport. That distinction explains why last year's story resolved itself the way it did. Despite the player ranking controversy, Clark's commanding fan vote total carried her into a captaincy anyway, alongside Napheesa Collier, for a game she ultimately could not play in due to injury. The fan vote, in other words, has historically been Clark's strongest currency, the one number nobody could argue with, because it came directly from the people buying tickets and watching broadcasts. This year, for the first time since she entered the league, that exact currency is the one showing weakness. Does that change the calculus for outside observers who, in the past, only needed to glance at a runaway fan vote to know which side of the conversation to defend? There is also a pattern in the timing of outside reactions worth noting. The liked Instagram post from last summer did not appear the moment the player rankings were released. It surfaced after Dick Vitale's post had already gone viral and after Sports Illustrated had already amplified it. In other words, the public reaction tends to follow the loudest wave of backlash, not the initial news itself. Right now, that wave is still building. Jason Whitlock's comments are circulating. Fan accounts are organizing renewed voting pushes. The Fever's own social channels are reframing the story. If the pattern from 2025 repeats itself,
There. An offensive foul.
any outside reaction, from James or anyone else with similar reach, would likely arrive closer to when the backlash peaks, not at this earlier stage where the story is still developing. There is a broader precedent worth considering too, one that has nothing to do with Clark specifically. Across professional sports, leading vote-getters who slip in the standings rarely stay quiet about it for long. Not the athletes themselves, and not the figures who have publicly backed them before. As a former perennial leading vote-getter himself across 2 decades in the NBA, James has a vantage point that few others in this conversation share. He has experienced firsthand what it looks like when fan attention shifts toward rising stars, and what it looks like when that attention swings back. That experience does not guarantee a reaction this time around, but it does mean that if one comes, it will likely come from someone who understands exactly what these numbers represent to the player living through them. There is one more layer of silence worth examining.
Late in the contest, delivering.
He has been spectacular.
The league's own. The WNBA has not issued any commentary framing this year's voting shift as a concern, and there is no indication it intends to. That is, in its own way, telling. League officials have every incentive to let the story play out through fan engagement rather than official statements, because controversy of this exact kind, competitive, debatable, impossible to fully resolve, tends to drive exactly the kind of voting activity that benefits the league regardless of which player ultimately gains ground. Silence from the league is not evidence that nothing is happening. It may simply be evidence that the league understands a contested race draws more attention than a runaway one ever could. So this is less a story about whether someone famous will speak up, and more a story about timing, structure, and a fan base that has, twice before, proven capable of erasing a deficit once it mobilized. The pattern says watch and wait. The numbers say there is still time for everything to change. And the voting window itself says exactly how much time remains. 10 days to change everything. That is what separated the first returns from the close of voting at the time this video was made, with the window scheduled to close on June 27th. 10 days is not nothing. It is the same window Clark's fanbase has used before to turn a deficit into a record-setting lead.
X amount of games or Caitlin scored X amount of points. It's, I hope it's what I was able to do for the game of women's basketball. I hope it is.
In 2025, a slower start in the earliest returns gave way to a final tally exceeding 1.2 million votes, more than double what the next closest player received. Whether that same surge happens again depends entirely on whether her supporters treat 5th place as motivation or as a verdict already decided. The 2026 WNBA All-Star Game itself is scheduled for July 25th in Chicago, marking the second time the City and the Sky organization have hosted the league's mid-season showcase. Whoever finishes with the 2 highest fan vote totals when voting closes will be named team captains, just as Clark and Collier were the year before. That means the next update to these numbers, not this one, will be the figure that actually matters when rosters take shape. Everything happening right now is a snapshot of momentum, not a final judgment. There is also a team-level story unfolding underneath the individual one. Indiana's 3 players inside the early top 10 is not a small detail. It suggests a roster building towards something, even during a stretch where the win column has not always cooperated. If the Fever string together wins through the rest of June, the attention that follows winning basketball tends to lift every player on the roster's vote total at once. Clark included. A losing stretch tends to do the opposite, regardless of how well any one player is individually performing. The team's trajectory over these same 10 days may end up mattering just as much as anything said about Clark specifically. Still, momentum has a way of attracting attention on its own. A fan base publicly framing 5th place as unacceptable tends to generate exactly the kind of online volume that, in the past, has pulled commentators, athletes, and yes, former NBA stars into the conversation whether they intended to weigh in or not. If the numbers climb back toward where they sat last year, the story quietly resolves itself, the same way the player vote controversy did. If they do not, the pressure for somebody with real reach to say something, anything, will only grow louder with each passing day. Whatever happens over these final 10 days, one outcome already feels certain, or a single statistic gets treated as a referendum on Caitlin Clark's place in the sport. It has happened with rookie rankings, with all-star ballots, with injury timelines.
Fever fans want her back. The Fever, by the way, are getting pretty thin at guard with season-ending injuries to Ari McDonald, Sydney Colson, Shanae.
And now with a fan vote that, for the first time, did not automatically place her at the top. Each time, the pattern has looked remarkably similar: a sharp reaction, a wave of public debate, and eventually, a quiet gesture from somewhere unexpected that nudges the story back toward her favor. Whether that pattern holds for an 8th or 9th time is no longer really a question about basketball. It is a question about whether an audience this large, built this fast, settles into something more stable, or keeps swinging this hard with every single number that gets released. 10 days will answer most of these questions on their own. Whether one familiar name chooses to weigh back in before then remains the one variable nobody can predict with certainty. What is certain is that this exact situation, a sudden drop, a wave of public reaction, and a pattern of quiet support waiting in the wings, has played out before. The only open question is whether it plays out the same way twice. That is where this one stands. A 500,000 vote leader now sitting 5th. A fan base split between blame and motivation.
Women's basketball game against the Iowa Hawkeyes. All the buzz surrounding a player on that visiting team. Iowa's Caitlin Clark has become a national phenom, and some fans...
And a retired king whose past actions still hang over a headline like this one. 10 days remain before voting closes on June 27th, and history says that window has flipped these numbers before. If this breakdown helped make sense of the vote and the pattern behind it, tap like before moving on. Down in the comments, does the final tally swing back in Clark's favor, or does 5th place hold? Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next video covers what happens when the real numbers land.